And call the meeting to order. I'm told we have a quorum, so if we want to start just going around the room with introductions, Colleen Mayu with the town of Londonderry.
Nancy Michaels, Londonderry Chamber of Commerce.
Andrew Haddock, Planning County Justice.
Bruce Thomas,
Kristen Clark, Manchester.
Linda Dusenberry, NHDOT.
James Veo, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission.
Zach Swick, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission.
Fred Roberge with Easter Seals.
Michael in Manchester Transit.
Tracy Whitehead, Manchester Transit.
Jonathan Golden, City of Manchester.
Nate Miller, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, and Sylvia is not available to be with us today, so I will be filling the SNHPC's seat in her stead today. And maybe we go around, Colleen, to the virtual participants.
Yep, that would be great.
Monique, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, Monique Duchesne, Assistant Planner with the Commission.
Dave?
David Lewinovich, New Boston Planning Board and Select Board.
Thank you. A representative from the Greater Manchester Chamber?
Hi, Cole Real, Member Engagement Coordinator over here at the Greater Manchester Chamber, attending my first meeting.
Welcome, Cole. Tom?
Tom Clow, Ware, New Hampshire.
Adam?
Adam Lasney, staff with the commission.
George?
Joint Service, Derry Planning Department.
Cam?
Cam Perlman, staff with the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission.
Ricky?
Ricky DeSillo, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services.
Lee?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Lee Levine, Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Lee. Tammy? Tammy says she does not have a microphone. Tammy is is a staff member here at the commission. She just started last week, and she's attending from her desk over in the other room. So welcome, Tammy. Dean?
Hi, yeah, this is Dean Williams from Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission.
Linda Kuhnhart?
Linda Kuhnhart, Francistown, New Hampshire Planning Board.
And who is participating from iPhone?
That's Sylvia Von Aulock. Can you hear me?
We hear you, Sylvia.
We can hear you.
Oh, good.
All right, I think introductions are complete. I will yield the floor back to you, Colleen.
Thanks, Nate. So procedurally, was I told that in order to let the people online vote, do we need to vote to have the online participants voting, or what was?
We used to be required to do that, but we have our commission updated the bylaws.
Excellent.
Commission to allow, as long as we have a quorum in the room, to allow any voting members participating virtually to do so.
Perfect.
So we don't need to do the extra step anymore of taking the separate motion to allow that.
Excellent. All right, so then our first item is action on minutes from September 16th. So do I have a motion from either someone in the room or on Zoom?
Linda Kuhnhart, Francistown, so moves.
Linda Kuhnhart moves.
And I see a second from George.
Colleen, I'll second. George and Derry.
Thanks, George.
George Ciora seconds.
Anyone have any comments, discussion on the minutes? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of approval?
I think we need a roll call.
Oh, we need a roll call.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So all those, I guess, if we can just, do we need a roll call in the room and on Zoom, or?
I think so.
Okay, all right. So all those in favor, and I guess I'll start, Nancy.
Aye.
Andrew.
Aye.
Bruce.
Aye.
Kristen. Aye. Oh, should they be saying their own name? Should I, or we?
You're good. Yeah.
I don't vote.
Staff doesn't vote except for me today.
Colleen Mayu, aye.
Jonathan Golden. Michael in, yeah.
Fred Roberge, yes.
Nate Miller, yes. Linda? Yes on the minutes?
Yes. Yep.
I was not here.
Abstain?
Abstain, yes. Okay. I heard, so Linda Doonesbury abstained, Linda Kuhnhart, I heard saying aye. I guess to go through, who else is a voting person on Zoom?
Dave, are you technically New Boston's representative today and Mark Soon instead?
I am. I will abstain.
Okay. Cole?
I'll abstain. I was not here.
Tom?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Lee, you're a non-voting member, I believe. Ricky?
Yes.
Dean?
I don't believe I'm a voting member.
You're not a voting member either, my apologies.
Yeah, I'm right.
And Linda, you voted yes, am I correct?
Yep.
Okay, I think we are good on the minutes.
Thank you. All right, so our first item is tip amendment number 2.
I have an extensive presentation, on tip amendment number 2. Can everyone see this? Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
I can.
Okay. So just a brief overview of tip amendment number 2. New Hampshire DOT requested that we amend our tip to accommodate a funding adjustment for a project in the town of Ware. Tip amendment 2 was released on October 8th. We held a 10-day public comment period, and a public hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday's MPO meeting. Normally, I would spend the next few minutes kind of walking through all of the different project changes in a tip amendment. In this case, we only have one project change. So this is a very simple tip amendment. And the project change is to this project. It's the Route 77 bridge over Canal 2 of Choate Brook in the town of Ware. And the amendment is good news. It's adding fiscal year 22 engineering phase funding. It's also changing the funding source of that project to a non-urbanized area program under the Surface Transportation Block Grant, or STBG. So we've got a shift in funding from one federal program to another, as well as adding fiscal 22 engineering phase funding. And this amendment will ensure that what's programmed in the tip reflects what is programmed in the current 10-year plan. So it's really bringing this project into consistency with the current adopted 10-year plan. So that's the one project change. We also administratively are including, we included tip amendment number 2 in your packets, and there is some additional information that we are incorporating into the tip as part of amendment number 2. And that's because MPOs are required under federal regulations to incorporate public transportation safety targets into the first tip amendment or update occurring after July 20th of 2021. This is our first tip amendment occurring after July 20th, 2021. So we are incorporating and have a section of the tip amendment that incorporates those public transportation safety targets. You may recall that we adopted those safety targets back in May. So now they are being formally incorporated into the tip as part of amendment number 2, because we need to do so for the first amendment occurring after July 20th. So that's kind of an administrative item. If you're interested in reading about what those targets are as a refresher, again, we kind of covered this in May, but if you're interested in that, all of that information is in tip amendment number 2. And that's basically it for tip amendment number 2. One project adjustment in the town of Ware, and the incorporation of our public transportation safety targets. Any questions on tip amendment number 2?
I don't see any in the room. Anybody on Zoom have questions? Hearing none, I think we're looking for we are looking for a motion to recommend adoption of tip amendment number 2. Anyone?
Second.
All right, so I've got Andrew and Fred. Anyone with any other discussion comments on the motion? Okay, all those in favor, again, we'll do this by roll call. So why don't we start, Andrew, if we start with you and go around the room?
Aye. Andrew Haddock. Aye.
Kristen Cole. Nancy?
Aye.
Colleen Mayu, aye.
Fred Roberge, aye.
Mike Williams, yes. Jonathan Golden, aye.
Nate Miller, aye.
Okay, so on Zoom, Cole,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Ricky,
Aye.
and
Linda.
Aye.
Okay,
It's unanimous. Thank you all very much. We will have that public hearing on Tuesday, and we will note the TAC's unanimous recommendation, tip amendment number 2.
All right, so next up, Nate, a 10-year plan update.
Back to me again. I know why it's not showing me some of the things that I would normally see here. There we go. All right. Can everybody see this presentation?
Yep.
Quick update on the 10-year plan. If you recall, the last time we met, the 10-year plan had not been released yet. It was released 2 or 3 days later. I think it was released. We met on Thursday. I think it was released the following Monday. And in advance of the first Gasset hearing in the region, which was, I believe, that Tuesday. So I kind of gave a sneak preview of what I thought would be in the 10-year plan last month, and everything I said held true. All of that stuff actually was in the 10-year plan. But just as a refresher, as you'll recall, we focused our efforts in this 10-year plan cycle on adding supplemental funding to 2 projects in the region that we knew to be underfunded, those being Bedford and Londonderry. We knew that we could get Londonderry completely to the finish line in this, in terms of being fully funded in this 10-year plan. We added supplemental funding to Bedford, but additional funding was still going to be needed in Bedford to get that project to construction, due to some beneficial financial forecasts that we expect out of the infrastructure bill that's currently being debated. New Hampshire DOT was able to fully fund both of these projects in the draft 10-year plan. So in the draft 10-year plan, both Bedford and Londonderry are fully funded, which is great news for us, and means that when we head into the next 10-year plan update cycle, we'll be able to add new projects and address new needs in the plan. Also, I mentioned this last month, but it certainly did come to fruition as expected. The TAP awards, the Transportation Alternative Program awards, were included in the draft tip. The top 2 projects in the region were both funded, those being the rail trail extension in Derry from Madden Road to the Londonderry town line, as well as the multi-use path on Canal Street between Granite and Brook Street in Manchester. So that was good news to see the top 2 projects in the region funded in the TAP program and included in the draft 10-year plan. We talked a little bit about the delays last month in the turnpike projects. So even though there's more federal funding, we expect more federal funding may be coming to New Hampshire eventually, if and when the infrastructure bill is passed that's currently being debated. The same does not hold true for state-funded programs. State-funded programs have been affected significantly by the travel pattern changes resulting from the COVID pandemic. And that affects the toll revenues that fund turnpike system projects, and it affects the gas tax revenues that fund other statewide efforts. And so as it relates to the turnpike system, the reduced revenue forecasts as a result of the COVID pandemic are resulting in some delays to important turnpike projects in the region. So we talked about this last month, but all of this did come to fruition in the draft 10-year plan as we expected. Exit 6 is delayed 4 years, Exit 7 delayed 3 years, and the widening of the F.E. Everett Turnpike between Nashua and Bedford will still start in 2022, but the completion of that project has been delayed 3 years. So it was formerly 2022 to 2025. Now it's 2022 to 2028. So the completion of the project has been delayed, and part of that is the result of those reduced revenue forecasts. So no change from what we talked about last month. I'm just confirming that all of these things are actually what's in the 10-year plan. On the public transportation side, there are 2 important things in the 10-year plan that I would just note. There has been a transfer of $800,000 per year that has occurred for a number of years now to support the 5310 program. We used to call that, I believe, the purchase of service program. It's now been consolidated with other 5310 funds. That $800,000 a year transfer from the STBG program is, it's basically a transfer from federal highway funds to FTA funds. That does support a number of services in the region, including the Londonderry shuttle service and that CART provides. So that's important, as well as the transfer of 25% of the CMAQ program, that's Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality program, which is also a Federal Highway Administration program. That transfer to support transit needs. So basically it's a transfer of CMAQ to FTA funding to support various public transportation capital and operating needs around the state. So both of those transfers are very important to our public transportation services in the region and all of the public transportation services around the state. And we continue to support those in the 10-year plan. What's not addressed in the 10-year plan that we know are some of the things that we'll be looking at in the next 10-year plan update cycle. We do know that the town of Deerfield has interest in the roundabout conversion at 107 and Candia Road and Church Street. The town of Hooksett continues to be strongly interested in pursuing a corridor study of the Route 3A corridor, an engineering study to determine what needs to happen in that corridor to accommodate their existing and future demands. The I-293 and 2nd Street engineering study in Manchester, as well as the I-93 exit 8 in the Wellington Road area interchange improvements that we had done an initial look at in this 10-year plan cycle. And then lastly, the intersection improvements in Manchester at Campbell Street and Hooksett Road, Campbell Street and Hamill Drive. So all of those things, you'll remember these. They were on our radar screen for this 10-year plan. We couldn't fund them due to funding constraints, but they will serve as a starting point for the next 10-year plan update, as well as whatever may come in as new needs identified by the communities. So these are some things that we certainly are on the radar screen heading towards the next 10-year plan update. We did, since the last meeting, have, there are 3 Governor's Advisory Commission on Intermodal Transportation, what we call GACIT, G-A-C-I-T, GACIT. 3 hearings are scheduled in the region. 2 of those have been held. The first one was held on September 22nd in Londonderry. It was a lightly attended meeting. I think there were fewer than a half dozen members of the public there. Kevin Smith, the town manager in Londonderry, spoke in strong support of a number of the projects that are programmed in the plan in the town of Londonderry. And then one resident spoke named Ray Breslin, who is has opposition, is personally opposed to the Exit 4A project and due to a number of different environmental concerns. So he spoke at some length about his opposition to the Exit 4A project. And that was really it. It was those 2 comments were really the only comments that were received in Londonderry. In Manchester, on the 28th of September, we had the hearing had a few more attendees than Londonderry did. We had 15 to 20 people in the room, I would say, as well as an additional 5 to 10 participating virtually. So that meeting did have a virtual component. I think the exact number was 8 people participating virtually. We heard multiple comments expressing, I would say, general support for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure projects and encouraging DOT to enhance their focus on bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure in the 10-year plan. We also heard a number of comments, including from Senator D'Alessandro and others, expressing disappointment about the delays to the Turnpike program projects. I think everybody understands why those delays are happening, but there's still some disappointment that those projects are not happening on the schedule that was originally anticipated. So a number of comments did encourage DOT to complete those projects as expeditiously as possible, given the funding constraints. Andre Guerin, the town administrator in Hooksett, also spoke about the needs of the 3A corridor and the Hackett Hill area. So the town of Hooksett was represented at that hearing as well and was able to get on record about some of the needs on the 3A corridor. The final GACIT hearing in the region is next Tuesday, October 26th. It will be in Derry. at the Derry Municipal Center, which is right in the village area in Derry on Manning Street. And Councilor Stevens will host that meeting. It's actually, Derry is not in Councilor Gatsis's executive council district. It's in Councilor Stevens' executive council district. So Councilor Stevens will be the host of that hearing. And then lastly, I would note that New Hampshire DOT is conducting a survey, a public survey to hear feedback about the 10-year plan and the priorities that are programmed in the 10-year plan. I will stop sharing at this point, and I'm going to make my colleague Monique a co-host, and I will ask Monique to kind of point people to where they can find this survey and how to find and take the survey that DOT has currently out there.
Great, thank you, Nate. I will point everyone to the NHDOT 10-year plan landing page. It's a whole treasure trove of goodies if you want to get more into the plan. There's the draft plan itself, supplemental information from the Gasset hearings, and then the rest of the Gasset hearing schedule, and additionally the survey for the plan. So if you just click on the link for the survey, it takes about 6 to 7 minutes. And there's a couple of different priority ranking activities, different spending categories. So you rank the categories. Another activity exercise to do is sort of a trade-off of what your preferences are for different categories, like bike ped, safety, and resiliency of the network. And then another activity is a rating activity to different type of categories within the survey as well. And then the survey wraps up with some basic demographic information, and then a comment section just for any additional comments where your voice might not have been heard through the different activities. And lastly, I'll point you to where any public comment, any written public comment would be sent to. And public comment is open until November 8th. So that gives everybody about 2.5 weeks to dive in and add any additional input. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me. If not, it's a pretty simple Google search of the 10-year plan to get to the DOT page.
So I'm slow on computer. Go back. So go back. How do you find the first place where you can then go down to find the survey? It's at the DOT.
Yep. So
I just missed the beginning, the very beginning, like way back in the beginning.
Okay. So yeah. So just a simple Google search to NHDOT 10-year plan. That'll take you to the DOT's website, and then on here, the second link down is the survey.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Alrighty, thank you.
Thanks, Monique. So that's all I had on the 10-year plan. I don't know if there are any other questions.
Anyone have any questions for Nate? Seeing none. So 2020 US Census update. Zach.
Okay. While Zach's setting up, I would just note on that survey that almost every single question has
a PDF, and then it should be revealed.
So it's pretty well structured to solicit written feedback on a whole host of subjects. It's pretty well done.
Can everyone online see that?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to be giving an update on the 2020 census, what we know so far. Couple of things before we start. One, I have a bunch of slides. Typically, my cardinal rule is never show people more than you could possibly take in during a presentation. I'm going to break that rule for two reasons. One, we have a bunch of stuff to cover, and if you don't see it here, there's a good chance you're not going to see it anywhere else. Two, this presentation and the slides themselves, and then I will also do a presentation as well where I go through everything in depth, and we'll up that online so people can reference it. In most cases, individual towns are not listed their results in here just because there's too many, and when you start going through everything, it's too complicated. When I upload the actual slides, I will put back in all the town specific numbers so people can see that. The other thing is I tested this last night, and the slides were not very visible. So I spent the last, this morning and part of last night reformatting everything so it was more visible for people in the room. It looked good online. It did not look good in the room. So if there are some spelling errors or something like that, please excuse it. We'll clean it up later. And this is a very similar presentation that I will be giving to the MPO on Tuesday. And since we have such, we have a lot of time, if people have questions, if we want to have a more informal conversation about this, just speak up. James, would you mind dimming the lights a little bit? Thanks. So in August, the census released their first set of data that's anything smaller than the state level, and that's the redistricting data. And that's for census block county subdivisions, which in New Hampshire means cities and towns mostly, and then counties. And this is the data that's necessary for states and cities to modify legislative districts. So this, you hear it talking about, we're going to do redistricting at the state level, something like that. This is the data they use. And this includes total population, race and Hispanic and Latino ethnicity for the total population, 18 plus population, race and Hispanic and Latino ethnicity for that population, housing units, both occupied and vacant, and move this here so we can see it, group quarter housing population, which is everything from dorms to nursing homes to prisons. There's going to be a delay on all other Census Bureau data due to two things. One that you can probably guess. One, the COVID threw everything out the window. I remember we spent about a year preparing for the census, and then in March 2020, all of that ended, and everything that we had tried to do had to be totally rethought. So the Census Bureau is screwing around with that. And then the second thing is, you probably don't know, is they've implemented a new process called differential privacy, which in layman's terms, at a very small level, it injects some randomness into the numbers. They were finding that you were able to, look at some census data and figure out who that person was at a very small level. And that, I can't remember if it was legislation, or I'm sorry, I can't remember if there was litigation or they decided to do that on their own, that they, were going to shake it up a little bit. So things work out at the state level, at the county level, even at the town level. It's when you start looking at this particular census block, this county, this city block right here, this particular person, they might not actually be here. They might be one block over. And the social scientists and planners are not happy about this, but the Census Bureau has made their decision, and that's what's going to happen. Anyway, that adds, they have to process all the data a bunch of times, and that adds to the delays in actually releasing it. So we should, right now, we're not really sure when we're going to see new stuff. We expect it'll be summer, but we're not sure. So we are waiting on a lot of different things, but even with this small data set, we can figure out about a bunch of stuff. Okay, so just a little PSA first. Here are two maps of New Hampshire population density. Do you want to guess which one's correct? It's a trick question. It says lie at the top. They are both correct. This is a little PS. This is a warning that throughout this presentation, you are going to see graphs and charts and maps with varying legends with different scales, all trying to do different things. Now, and for example, on the left here, this is showing population density with groups in such a way that we can show the similarities between groups and the differences between groups. The right is the absolute values. between each group, between equal breaks between the highest and the lowest. Now, these have different purposes. You can be used for different things. They can also be used to mislead people. So just pay attention for all these as we go through, because when we talk about Francistown and we talk about the sole state of New Hampshire, we're going to have to use very different scales. So population. I'm also going to talk about Metro New Hampshire, which is those counties which are in the metro, which are in our metropolitan areas. So Hillsborough, Rockingham, and Stratford County. Non-metro areas are all other counties. We should keep in mind that Hooksett is actually in Merrimack County. So for the purposes of this, Hooksett is non-metro, even though it has many of the qualities that we would assume are more like metropolitan New Hampshire. I also break up the towns, or you break up the SNHPC municipalities into 3 sections. One is Manchester, the other is all towns over 10,000, which is those towns, which is about 6, which is Bedford, Derry, Goffstown, Hooksett, Londonderry, and Windham, and all towns under 10,000 residents, which is Auburn, Candia, Chester, Deerfield, Francistown, New Boston, and Ware. And I'll present these categories so we can kind of look at how the different towns are moving as different classes of repairs. So here's where we are. In 2020, New Hampshire is about 1.4 million people. We talk a lot about New Hampshire being a rural state, and that's true if you're talking about the land. 93% of New Hampshire is rural area, but 3 in 5 New Hampshire residents live in an urban area, and 3 in 5 New Hampshire residents live in a metropolitan area. Compare ourselves to our other states. We have New Hampshire here, so we grew by 4.6 in the last decade. You can see Massachusetts beat us. We beat Rhode Island by a little bit, but and there was some variation between the last decade. Massachusetts didn't grow very much during the last decade, grew a lot more this decade. So New Hampshire's population grew by a net 61,000, or approximately 4.6%. Natural increases, so births exceeding deaths, only occurred in 3 counties: Hillsborough, Stratford, and Rockingham. Every other county, deaths exceeded the number of births. So 89% of New Hampshire's growth in the last decade was due to migration. So this is the Boston metro area in its largest sense. This is let's see if I can get this, the Boston, Worcester, Providence combined statistical area. And that's, part of the net we're in here. So here's, we can see Manchester at the top there, and as long as the Merrimack cities, but zoom in, here's how some of our areas have done. Manchester grew by 5.5, Derry by 3.6, but you can see some of the surrounding towns actually grew significantly more. Lawrence grew by 16.7%, Lowell grew by 8.5, Haverhill by 11.3. In general, Massachusetts comparable cities had a lot more growth than New Hampshire cities. Worcester grew by 14.1. Worcester is now actually the largest it's ever been, which is, amazing for when I used to go to concerts there 15 years ago when it was a ghost town. Now, 20,000 people moved there in the last 10 years. So Massachusetts has seen a real boom, and we have seen a little bit less. And here, it's a little hard to see, but you can see with different groups, the growth ranges from, Auburn grew by 20%, and the smallest would be Candia, grew by 2.7%. There are going to be a series of bar graphs like this. Whenever there's a bar graph with 2 on either side, on the left is the absolute value. So that, in 1970, that's how many residents we had. In 2020, that's how many residents we had. On the right is going to be how many new residents or new housing units that we added. So we can see, in 1970, New Hampshire had about 740,000 residents. And, in that time, we grew very quickly. I'm sure even if we looked at 1960, 1950, that growth would continue as well. We had very high growth in the 70s and 80s and 90s through to 2000. It slowed down, and you can start to see it slowly sliding down there from the peaks of the 80s and 90s. And if we look at the metro and non-metro areas, we see while both are growing, and historically both grew a lot over that 50-year period. If we look forward to today, Metro New Hampshire has had about steady growth over the last 20 years, while non-Metro New Hampshire has fallen off a lot. So this is a cumulative distribution graph, which you might not have ever seen before, but what you can keep in mind is what it shows you, how quickly do you get to 100%? So this is looking at all the new housing that is built over these 4 decades. And the steeper that graph is, the quicker it gets to 100%, the smaller the number of towns it took to get to 100%. So you can see here is in between the 90s through 2010, those, the way that the towns would add new residents was fairly even across all the towns. But then in the last 10 years, we get to 100% much quicker. That graph, that curve is much sharper. And we see that too, in 1980, 1990, 10% of towns lost population. In the last decade, it was 29%. 75 towns and municipalities and unincorporated areas lost population in the last decade. So here's the SNHPC area. We have 1970 on the left to 2020. And this, we can see our population goes up. It peaks in the 1980 and 1990. This is when a lot of New Hampshire peaked. This is when my family moved here. Moved here in 88, 89, part of this wave. And you see we go down a little bit and then we come back up a little bit after during the last decade. But we've almost doubled since 1970. Now we have black is Manchester, red is the rest of the SNHPC area. And you can see that, before 1970, Manchester was was 1.5 times the size of the rest of the region. And then over that 50 years period, we just see, a ballooning of those 13 communities as there's suburban and exurban development, as the highways are finished, as northern Massachusetts becomes, a economic boom town. And people like my dad lived in southern New Hampshire, worked in Cambridge, or worked in Woburn. These are the people that moved into these areas during this period. And so you can see, but that growth is slowing a little bit. Now we've had about 13,000 the last 2 years, and Manchester has actually come up a little bit. I'm sorry, last 2 decades. Now, if we look at 10,000 towns, larger than 10,000, towns less than 10,000, this is the total growth, total size on the left and the growth on the right. And you can see again that boom and then kind of a slowdown in the last few decades. Although, so now the towns that are 10,000 and towns that are under 10,000 are much closer in the terms that they're adding each year. If we look at the rate of growth, so here we have SNHPC's black, Metro New Hampshire's in blue, and non-metros in so people can see it here, non-metros in red. You see 1970 to 2020, new SNHPC grew by 105%, Metro New Hampshire grew by 100%, and non-metro grew by 75%. And then if we look at from 2000 to 2020, the growth continues, although much slower, but non-metro actually starts to, you can see them kind of start to plateau there over the last decade. But within the region, it varies significantly. So here are all the towns. Each one of those strands represents a municipality in the region, and the SNHPC is the regional value. And you can see within that value, it can, it matters. It can vary a great deal. And if we look at it breaking out into those 4 different categories, again, you can see that, the 10,000, less than 10,000 towns are growing the fastest, which is not surprising, since they have the smallest denominator. They're going to see the largest relative growth. And then, but they're starting to pull away from the over 10,000 towns. And so we have a rate of, Manchester is growing the slowest because it's the largest, while some of our smallest towns are growing the fastest. And here you can see how we did population in the last 2 decades. You can see we added, less this year, or in this, that's not true. Some of our towns added more this decade, some added less, but we all did significantly better than the state as a whole. You can see that, non-metro grew by 2%, when, Manchester grew by 6%. Here's a series of maps, and it's going to be hard to see this here.
I think if you click that green bar, Zach, it'll may hide that whole thing.
Which one?
I may be wrong. The one at the bottom. You are sharing your screen.
Will that say stop sharing?
No. It's not.
There's a little arrow to the left, see that?
Oh.
Nope,
That
maybe not.
didn't solve it.
If you
Sorry,
go-
Zach.
No.
I think if you go to more, and there's a thing that hide floating.
Hide video panel.
Hide floating meeting.
Oh,
Thank
there
you.
you go.
Yay, thank you. So these are 2 maps, and this is showing growth from 2000 to 2010 and growth from 2010 to 2020 in absolute terms, number of absolute residents. And there's not a, so we can see that there was a, growth in the last decade, there was a lot of growth in Dover. That's that big red dot on the seacoast. While in the last decade, it was kind of along every turnpike or along Route 3, and then along the seacoast as well. And you can see some of those blue areas, which are population loss along the west, on the north, in the far north country. And if we look at percent growth, it's kind of all over the place. But again, you can see that there is growth between 2000 and 2010 throughout the state. But then in 2010 to 2020, it slows down once overall. And then again, you can see there's some of that blue along the Vermont state line, with some exceptions like, Lebanon, Hanover are growing, Littleton's growing, but a lot of those areas on the western part of the state have slowed down. I'm going to go over this quickly because this is not really important in our area, but because we have some colleges, but we're not, we don't have UNH, or we don't have Ohio State University, one of these colleges with huge populations. So this is the breakdown of our different populations across. You can see for your particular towns, goes from anywhere from Manchester has about 3,200, and some towns have 0. And we saw a growth in our total group quarter population. Correctional facilities lost about half, and other facilities grew by 99%. I'm not sure what other facilities includes. That might be boarding houses, something like that. So the big takeaway is the SNHPC is growing slower than in the 20th century, and the population growth varies by regionally. And so it's been concentrated down to the southeast. Okay, so population less than 18%. You can see in 1970, we had, on the left here is our population in 1970, our population in 2020 for people under 17 or under 18 years old for the state, and then down for the towns and the region below. And you can see across the board, we have, in some cases, lost population in that population real terms. Manchester has 6,800 fewer minors than it did in 1970, but all across the board, we have all lost as a percentage of our total. Minors in the SNHPC used to make up 34% in 1970. Today, they make up 21%. So as a whole, they're getting a much smaller part of the population. And we can see this, that minors in both in the state and regionally peaked about 2000 population. That's about when I graduated from high school, would have been 2005. So about that time. And these are the people that moved in the 80s. And then 18 years later, they 90s and 80s, 8 years later, they graduate and go off to college or move somewhere else. And you can see since 2000, all of us are falling, except not quite, because within the region, there is some variability. Everybody went up, pretty much everybody went up and peaked and came down, except there's been growth in the last decade for Auburn and Wyndham for their minor population. And as a whole, you can see same thing, kind of everybody goes up and everybody comes down. And again, everybody's going down. And this, we can see this in the ratio of households. So here we have, in SNHPC in 1980 had a occupied minors to occupied housing unit of 0.8. Now we have 0.53. And in some places like non-metro, New Hampshire, it's down to 0.42. So there are fewer, minors per occupied housing.
Zach, is another way of saying that is like 1 in every 2 houses has a kid in it.
Yeah. Whereas before it would have been closer to 1 in every house. So minor takeaways, the number of minors in the region is falling slower for us than for the rest of the state. 12 out of 14 municipalities saw their minor population decrease. Minors per household have decreased by 35% since 1980. And there are some exceptions, like I said, Windham and Auburn did add some in the last decade. Race and ethnicity. New Hampshire is now the 4th least diverse state in the United States. It previously was the 3rd, but we are more diverse, but we are still significantly less diverse than the nation as a whole. Manchester, which people think of being as a very diverse, multicultural city, is 1.5 times less diverse than the United States as a whole. So while we've increased in diversity, you can see we're still, the national rate, we're still way behind. Population, here's how the populations have increased that's SNHPC in the top corner, top left, Manchester, greater than 10,000, less than 10,000. And you can see for all of them, the population is going up, and for all of them, the racial and ethnic minority population is also increasing. This is looking at it instead as percentages. So this is held at total, 100%, whatever it is. And you can see the proportion over time for every town, doesn't matter what they are, what size, that the racial and ethnic minority population is increasing. And this I think is really interesting. So this is the net new residents. So this is people that move, are born, died, all that sort of thing in each room, but by whether they're white alone, not Hispanic or Latino, or whether they're minority. And you can see whether for SNHPC, for Manchester, for towns under 10,000, for towns over 10,000, in 2020, between 2010 and 2020, for towns less than 10,000, the minority population growth was almost the same as the white growth in those towns. So in places like Candia, in places like Auburn, where we think of small towns, but we don't think of there being a large minority population, there was almost more growth there than there was for the white population. So this is, while this is, concentrated, we'll see in Manchester, it's happening everywhere. And if you're looking for specific numbers, you can look here, but we're not going to go through all these. But you can see that, SNHPC is now about 70% minority. Manchester's about 26%. Towns over 10,000, 12. Towns under 10,000, 7. And New Hampshire as a whole is about 13, but the United States is 42. So, it's still relatively small by national standards. And it's concentrated. These are two very different graphs looking at, it's two maps looking at minority and ethnic population, but they have very different scales. So pay attention to that. The one on the left is showing it by municipality. Nashua is actually the most diverse, with about 3 in 10 of its residents being a minority. And then, it goes down all the way down to 1.3%. But even, if we zoom into towns, so on Manchester, this is Manchester here, using a much more aggressive scale, you can see the different neighborhoods. So my neighborhood, it looks like it's about, it's about 50%. I live in a neighborhood in Manchester, and you can see some other neighborhoods, it goes up to about 64%. And it is throughout the state, it's very segregated, and it's isolated to certain areas. On the left is all the black represents 2/3 of the population for for New Hampshire in total. On the left is 2/3 for the minority population, and you can see that it's while it's spread out on the left, on the right, it's concentrated to urban areas, whether it's Nashua, Manchester, the 93 corridor, Concord, the Seacoast. It's not spread out like the general population. And there's also skews for the younger population. Minorities in the SNHPC region, are minors, I should say, in the SNHPC region, are 1.8 times more likely to be a minority than somebody over 18. You know, so in Manchester, if you're under 18, you're twice as likely as somebody over 18 living in Manchester being a racial or ethnic minority. And while we don't have a breakdown across, age groups for the entire spectrum, if we look at the 2019 ACS, you see that, in the SNHPC, if you're 25 years old, if you're under 25, you're 4 times as likely to be a minority as somebody 65-year-old. This is what we see nationwide, just that if the older the population is, the whiter it is, the younger it is, the less white it is. And this is true for New Hampshire as it is for anywhere. So the number of racial and ethnic minorities is growing, still very low by national standards. Regional population is concentrated in Manchester, but it's increasing every every municipality. Population less than 18 years old is twice as diverse as the adult population. And we come to the last one, not last category, and that's housing. So in New Hampshire, in 1980, I didn't go back to 1970 for some technical reasons. I'm going to try to fix that for the MPO presentation so it matches the population figures, but we can assume that in 1970 it was growing as well. So on the left, you can see that, we haven't quite doubled our number of housing units between 1980 and 2020, but we grew a lot in the 80s, a little bit in the 90s. Again, we can see there's a boom in between 2000 and 2010. This is the housing boom, this is the housing bubble, where anywhere in the United States, if you could build a house, it made economic sense until it didn't. And then we see a slowdown in the last decade. But if we zoom in at a regional level or a metro, non-metro, it's much more stark. Now you can see everybody's growing as it is on the left side, adding a little bit more, except, and then about 2010, 2020, non-metro New Hampshire is not adding any houses, or is not building any net houses. And, metro New Hampshire is building less than they were during the housing boom of the 2010s. This again is this distribution graph, this cumulative distribution graph. And if the sharper the curve, the fewer towns it takes to get to the total of new houses. And you can see for 2020, which is the yellow curve, how much it stands out from the other curves, how much sharper it is. That means how quickly are you getting to 100%? And it's getting to 100% in the last decade much faster than it did for any of the previous decades. And we see that in the number of towns, 144 towns saw a gain in housing, 104 saw a loss in housing over the last decade. 40% of our towns saw a decrease in number of housing compared to 3% in 1980 to 1990. And for most people in this room, this is going to sound insane. Who's having to review all the building permits? I'm sure they come through your office so we are still building here, but it's not building outside of this region or outside of the Southeast. So SNHPC, 1980, we had about 60,000, 70,000 units. Today we have about 120,000. And so we built a lot in the 80s and then the 90s a little bit. We saw a bump in the 2000s for the housing boom, but it's not as stark as you look at it for statewide. And then we do, we're not building as much since then, but we're still building. Manchester and the rest of the region, you can see that, in 1980, Manchester had more housing units than the rest of the region, and then it was surpassed in about 2000. Again, they were building a lot outside of Manchester in the 80s and the 90s and 2000s, and you can see that start to slow down, and Manchester has actually picked up some. So they are building more units within Manchester. All the small towns, so we have towns under 10,000 in red, towns and over in gray. You can see that everybody's going up, but it's kind of slowing down, especially for the over 10,000 towns and the number that they're putting up every year. the rate for the under 10,000 towns has never been that high. It probably would be more so if you looked at them as a percentage of their rate. And here you can see how metro and non-metro and housing stock have changed. You can see everybody's going up from 1980s, and then around 2010, non-metro starts to flatten and starts to actually decrease. Everybody in our region is going up. But once again, the smaller towns are going up faster than the overall region and the overall towns. So as of today, or as of April, we had about 7,000 housing units, or net new housing units in our region. We're growing, not as fast as we were in previous decade, but if you compare us to the state or, the state rate where it's 4%, but, Manchester was growing by 4% and so was the state. Non-metro grew by 1% in the last decade. So this is going to be the graphs like we had before, where this is looking at net housing growth. So you can see that, in 2010 kind of was, before 2010, we were building everywhere. And this is, during the housing boom, anywhere you could build a house, it made sense to build a house. And then by 2010, we're actually losing housing units in much of the region, much of the state along the west and the North Country and some of the Upper Lakes region, Washington Valley. And you can see but we're still building down in Manchester along the Everett Turnpike, 93, Seacoast. And this is probably, I think, the most striking map of the whole thing. And this is percent growth. So on the left is from between 2020 to 2010, and right is from 2010 to 2020. Again, looking at percentage, this is the same legend, how everyone was building by at least 5% over the last previous decade. Most towns were building by 15%. And then suddenly everybody is either losing or growing anemically. It's a few towns like Auburn and Chester, and I believe that's Sandown, I can't remember for sure. Durham, some of these towns are building at rates that the rest of the state were the previous decade, but are, everywhere else it's fallen off precipitously. So here's New Hampshire. The geographic center of New Hampshire is about in Sanbornton, which is right there. And then the new housing center between 2000 and 2010 is that orange. And then between 2010 to 2020 is the blue on the bottom right. And you can see that it's moved about 20 miles in 10 years. The center, it's showing that, all the housing is happening in the south and towards the east. And none of the housing is happening in the state as a whole. And just real quick, so this is looking at the correlation between net housing groups, units, and net population. And for all the decades besides 2000, 2010, there's a pretty good relationship between the number of units that are built and the number of people that are actually living in that town at the end of the decade. Except for between 2000 and 2010, that rate falls off. And I'm not sure if that's because, it's obviously because of the housing boom, but is that because we're not building, we're building houses, but nobody's living in them. Now they're unsellable or something like that. I don't know. But something happened in 2000, 2010 that was different from all our previous decades. So housing, big takeaways, the number of housing units is growing, the rate is declining. The housing growth is uneven across the state, declines in the west and north. Recent housing growth, slowest in at least 4 decades. One of our towns, Francistown, although it supposedly lost housing units, I don't know if that's real. It's only 20 housing units. That's probably within the margin of error for the Census Bureau, but shows you where we are. And to wrap up, the SNHPC is growing, but we're older and more diverse than we used to be. The housing growth never recovered from the late 20th century housing boom. And regional patterns are solidifying, which is a thriving Merrimack Valley and Southeast, and the struggling West and North, with some exceptions. Any questions? I know that was a lot.
I got one. Linda Kuhnhart, Francis. So when you talk about loss of housing units, do you mean that houses actually disappeared and it doesn't exist anymore, like the unit's gone, or you mean loss in building of empty units that someone could buy?
It would be, loss in units mean loss in physical unit in the sense that there was a house there and now there is not a house, whether that was demolished or, so a lot of these places, if there was a place and it, if nobody was living there and became dilapidated and it was torn down, something like that.
So that one slide where you, for instance, from Francistown, it's the loss of 20 units, is that in the 10-year period?
That's in the 10-year period. And like, because that's, Francistown, that 20 houses, did 20 houses really disappear, or is that just, an error in the data that it's so small, but Francistown is such a small town that when, it can make it look like where that error gets smoothed over in other towns, it doesn't for Francistown. So I mean, I would use that with caution. But
yeah, I understand that. I'm trying to, but having that small number helps me work at what they're doing to show whatever they're trying to show. So because it's a small number, I can get my head around it. So when you talk, for instance, that same thing. When they talk about a loss of 20 units, do they then add in the new units built, or is like they
yes.
have two?
So that's the net. Those are all the net values. So if you built 10 houses and you lost 30 houses, the net would be 20 loss.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah. We don't, and for all of these are net because at this level, especially for population, if we know the population grew by this amount, we don't know if people at this point, if they moved in, if they died, if they were born. We just know that, when they counted, when they knocked on this door 10 years ago and said how many people live here, and then they did it again today, there's this much change. That's what we know. And we can make inferences, especially at the county level. We have better data about some people, where they moved, that sort of thing. But at the town level, we really don't have that.
Okay, but the light bulb came on. So we used to have these condominium complexes that were over by the so-called Crotchet Mountain Golf Course area. It was like a big deal development back in the day before Francistown instituted better zoning. So there was all these condos in separate buildings with lots of apartments in it, and they just sat empty and vacant and became decrepit. And we fought for years to have it demolished as they should have been, and they did finally get demolished in this past 10 years. So actually, the 20 units makes sense.
I mean, it could be that when it's something as small as, it could be just a small. Let me stop sharing. When it's that, when it's you have such a small housing stock, you could have one development close, that sort of thing could be enough to shift it. And that's also why you see it in the west and north, just where there are smaller populations. And so if you do have, a couple houses go derelict, it's enough that could actually shift it. And there are weird things in this data, like you probably couldn't see it with everything on there, but if anybody's real familiar with Henniker, they supposedly grew by 20% in the last decade in population wise. And even the town managers, like, what are you talking about? 20, we didn't have 1,500 people move here. Well, looking at it, either from the census data, they either didn't count the New England college kids last time, or they double counted them this time. I can't really tell, but it's stuff like that. So there are questionable issues that we need to work through, but on the whole, it's pretty solid. Are there any other questions? Yes.
You did a nice job outlining populations and age groups that are under 18 and then general population. Do you have any data around senior populations, where they are?
Not from this. So we have it from the American Community Survey, which is the 5-year, 1-year estimates that they do. We don't have any, we don't have that from the redistricting data, just because they don't care, in terms of who can vote. It's not, the voting age is 18, so they care about that. After that, they don't, that information is not available. It will be available at some point, not sure when that will be at this point. And the ACS in some cases is an estimate, in some cases it was close, or it's in all cases it's an estimate. Sometimes it's close to the redistricting numbers, other times it wasn't. Manchester was undercounted in the ACS by, I want to say, like 5,000. Some of the towns were actually a little bit lower, some are higher. So I can give you an idea of where we are, but for an actual exact count, we're gonna have to wait 8 months.
Zach,
Yeah.
With this new information, will we be able to, is this a complete set of information that will allow us to update our travel model?
Yeah, so whenever we do our travel model, we now have a new set of households, a new set of population. And then because it is at a block level, we can put them in the transportation area zones do not match up exactly with towns or census tracts or all that. But since we have at the block level, we can just plop them in there wherever they are in a much more fine-grained way. And that's so we had a previous set from 2010 to do the same, but then as you move farther away from the decennial census, that data becomes out of date, and the granularity of that becomes to be outweighed by the datedness of the data.
So Zach, just on the block group kind of note, I was at NECAPA last week and I was at a census data presentation that Ken Gallagher's counterpart in Vermont, like the head of the Vermont State Data Center, was giving this, and his message to the attendees was basically don't use block group data at this time until the census works out what some of the issues were, because I guess they were seeing too many irregularities in block due to that differential.
Yeah. So the census tract, it's not block group, it's census block, which it depends where you are. In Manchester, they're literally a city block. In other places, they can be a percent, up north, they could be a large part of the town because they're, they base them both on population and boundaries. And in some cases, some of those maps you'll see, if you actually go back, they'll say like towns under 100 residents. I threw them out and I didn't compare them because you do have situations where somebody from Berlin was, moved around within the county up to some unincorporated area up to where, and suddenly the population has grown by 500% in this area like that. So yes, it's less of a problem at a state level, at a county, and at a larger municipal level. But if I was, a town planner in Vermont or in New Hampshire, if I was, the town planner for any town, I'd say any town under 10,000, I would not be making decisions, based on where it says this person is exactly right here. The chances are they're not, because they have to, and this is why planners and social scientists were really upset with the Census Bureau when they decided to do this. But their number one priority is protecting people's privacy, and that's what they chose to do.
I mean, it sounded from this presentation, I'm talking about the guy from Vermont, that tract level data was reasonable to use, and anything bigger than tract level data is generally fine. But they seem to be seeing a lot of quirks at the block level data. They were seeing blocks that had 100% of all the residents of the block were under 18. It's like, where are their parents at? So they were seeing just really weird, quirky stuff, and his message was until the Census Bureau is trying to figure out how to fix this so you get useful data at the block group level, but it's not there yet.
Census tract is about, and that's what we use for most of our analysis and that stuff like that. Because that's pretty reliable, but once you start getting any lower than that, even with the old ACS data, especially in small areas, that you could get weird stuff. And I saw that the last time. I remember there was 400 people living at one location. Weird stuff like that doesn't get caught. Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you guys for sitting through that. I think Cam has a short presentation. Cam, do I need to make you a?
Yes, please. If you could make me a co-host.
Making you a co-host.
Thank you.
Okay, you should be all set.
All right. Well, that was very interesting, Zach.
Did we lose you?
Good stuff.
I thought it was great. I love nice graphs and charts.
Yeah, I know obviously it's a lot of stuff all at once. Yeah, but I'd recommend, once I get it finished, go back and look through and look at your individual town and see how you've changed over the last, in some case, 50 years. We have a pretty good, time span now that we have, the data has been consistent at a town level that we can see changes like that. You're all yours, Cam.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to do a brief presentation. I wanted to give the TAC members just an update about kind of what's going on with Commute Smart, especially right now because we have a Commute Smart challenge. And then I'm going to very, very briefly introduce the new Commute Smart trip logging software. But my idea is that I'd like to come back to the TAC and hopefully the MPO either in November or December to go a little more in depth to show you kind of exactly what this trip logger can do. And then we'll be able to explore some of the data from some of the users with a little more time. So just some background, Commute Smart, for those who don't know, it's a partnership between the state's regional planning commission, state agencies, various nonprofit transportation-oriented programs, working in collaboration with transit providers and businesses. And it's dedicated to encouraging and assisting people to choose sustainable transportation options in place of driving single occupancy vehicles. So why Commute Smart? You can save money and increase the vehicle life of your vehicle. Of course, you're cutting down on gasoline and maintenance, insurance, wear and tear, all that stuff. You can, it helps because it promotes increased physical activity. You're making your travel time a bit more productive, a little more healthy. From an employer standpoint, it can help strengthen the employee morale. It boosts employee recruitment and productivity by reducing costs of the stress associated with commuting. It can help create more parking and have on-time employees, alleviating parking shortages and maintenance costs while reducing employee absenteeism and unexpected departures and delayed arrivals. And then lastly, it makes a statement without a cost, so increasing the company PR and marketing opportunities by encouraging, a better quality of life for your employees and lowering the environmental impact. So that's just kind of, what is Commute Smart, why it matters. But so right now, there is a buses, bikes, and brooms commuting challenge, and it's a little tricky as far as the dates this year. It started on October 16th. Usually we do a full month. We were having a couple delays because of the contract with this new trip logging software, but so it's a shortened challenge, but nonetheless, it is happening right now. So for this challenge, you basically were asking you log any trip you make to work in any mode other than driving. And that could be walking, biking, transit, or carpool, or telecommuting, or any combo of those. And then compressed work weeks also can be counted as you're still reducing the number of trips driving alone. So compared to previous challenges, this challenge will be all individual based. So rather than being on a team with your employees and through your employer, it'll just be you up there. So you'll still be able to track your progress against others on the leaderboard. And even though teams will not be used for this challenge, you can still, encourage your coworkers and friends to participate. And then quickly, kind of two things. There are awards and incentives for this challenge. One of them is a raffle prize. So throughout the challenge, 6 individuals will be chosen at random to win a $25 gift card from a selection of different brands. To be eligible, you have to opt in with your profile through Commute Smart. The other one is a social media contest, and it's going to be giving out a $50 gift card, which will be awarded at the end of the challenge to the individual with the most social media buzz. And there's a bit more information about how you can enter this online on the Commute Smart website. So Commute Smart does have a new trip logging software. That is something that Commute Smart, the committee has been working on over the past several months. And it's very exciting because it's really sleek and it's very easy to use. So I'm just going to briefly kind of run through what it looks like on the phone and how to get started basically. So you just need an email and a password. The app is basically 5 main sections. It's to find rides, to record your trips, to get rewards, a profile, and then there's some more. For example, there's some information about various like transit opportunities or like transit organizations. So the first thing you have to do is you got to complete a profile. You have to enter in your name, your gender, if you smoke, any languages you speak. You have to put in a little bit about yourself. I think the idea is that you're much more likely to get a ride or give a ride to someone else if there's a little more information about you. You enter your home address, but it's just for you. Other people can't see it. You put in where you work, your commuting preference, what days are you commuting to work, and you can select who you would be giving a ride to or be willing to take a ride from. For instance, if you don't want to get in a car with someone who smokes, you don't have to. This is a screenshot from the new website. So it's Commute Smart New Hampshire. Let me see. Commute Smart New Hampshire. No, CommuteSmartNH.AgileMile.com. So Agile Mile is this new company. Anyway, the app is a lot more sleek, but I just wanted to show you, this is like the home page. Right here are like the rewards that you can use. And then, so here's like the actual, where you you find a ride. So I just put in my home in Manchester. Let's say I worked in Boston, and you have 4 carpooling options, and you can click on these, and you can find out a little more information. There's a van pool option. I believe that's like enterprise, and you can look at the transit route options, a very long bike route, and if you really wanted to walk, there is a walking route. And then, so I also wanted to show, I think I mentioned this before, so there are these transportation options, and it does provide links to all the transportation options kind of in your area. And we are working on adding some volunteer driver program information about here. And that's something that's in the works right now. And then another thing I just wanted to show, it's kind of fun little commute calculator. So, if you have even just a short commute of 3 miles one way, you can save $420 a year. It's a fun little tool. So like I said, I'd like to come back to the TAC to give a bit more on, what this software can do, kind of what can it mean for transportation planning and what we can do with the data. But yeah, I wanted to give a plug, and don't forget, there's the Buses, Bikes, and Brooms Challenge. Please sign up. It's fun. And get your coworkers to do it. And the more people that use this, the better shot it has at having a more sustainable life. So with that, that's really all I had. So I'd be willing to take any questions.
Thanks, Cam. Anyone have any questions for Cam about Commute Smart?
This is James Mayo. I just note that, amidst the COVID pandemic, we've seen a pretty significant shift in commute patterns, but over time, we may see a transition back to more normal patterns. And there are some employment centers within our region that really can benefit from this over time. And so in as much as, the employment centers in Manchester, Derry, and to some extent Bedford can utilize this stuff, the better it's going to be for dealing with overall congestion within the region. So that's part of why we promote and advocate for use of these programs, this transportation demand management program, because it can help mitigate congestion at a regional scale.
Bruce?
The timing of this isn't necessarily that great for bicycling and walking because it's Kentucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you take your broom, it's less of an issue.
Like I said, it's typically the whole month of October, and so there's probably data from past challenges that shows there was probably a bit more usership or participation in the challenge in earlier October, but we do one in the spring as well. It's definitely a way to get the word out about Commute Smart. And it just kind of branding wise, it's kind of nice for Halloween. But yeah, that's a good point though, Bruce.
Yeah. Although I will say the walks are, when I walk here, it's much nicer to walk when it's 60 degrees as opposed to 82.
Yeah.
Well. Right, anyone else have any questions or? All right, with that, is there any other business or anyone have announcements, anything they need to share?
Just one quick one. Just wanted to introduce folks to Tracy Whitehead, who's here today. She has succeeded Lori Makaravich. So if you've worked with Lori in the past, Tracy is our new regional service coordinator. So anything outside of Manchester proper, Tracy is your contact.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Great.
Does Dean? Oh no, never mind.
All right. If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All right. Do we need a roll
You don't need a
call
roll
adjournment?
call.
Okay, thank you. All right, then all in favor of adjournment? Aye.
Yeah,
All right, we'll see everybody next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Great presentations today.